Marlon Brando is dead. Now imagine that all of a sudden, there's a Marlon Brando spelled D-O-H. Imagine suddenly there's more and more Marlon Brandos coming out of the woodwork, and they're making sequels to Marlon Brando's movies. They're making Second to the Last Tango in Paris. They're making The Last Salsa in Honolulu. They're making Bring the Butter. They're making On the Shopping Mall, On the Riverfront. They're suddenly in movies where Eva Marie Saint and other co-stars are reprising their roles from On the Waterfront but wearing Hitler mustaches. Imagine that some of these movies focus on Marlon Brando's posthumous erection. And now imagine Marlon Brando is Bruce Lee, and you have entered the world of Bruceploitation. So Bruce Lee was already famous in Hong Kong and on the Chinatown circuit with his first two movies, The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, and then his third movie he directed, Way of the Dragon, but he wasn't big in America. He signed up to do Enter the Dragon with Warner Brothers. But Bruce Lee died in July of 1973. And when Enter the Dragon came out in August, it was a huge, huge, huge hit. And everyone had a huge, huge, huge problem because Bruce Lee's dead. He can't make any more movies. I don't think there's ever been a time in film history where the death of an actor has spawned an entire genre. But Bruceploitation is massive. I mean, between 74 and 1982 or 3, when it really sort of ended its run, you had close to 100 of these Bruceploitation movies.
On July 25th, 1973.
You had Bruce Lee documentaries. And there's movies that use Bruce Lee footage. So they could cobble together new Bruce Lee movies. There's continuations and sequels like New Fist of Fury, Big Boss 2. Then there's biopics. And then there's movies with an imitator playing Bruce Lee. There are a lot of Bruce Lee impersonators. Bronson Lee, Evan Kim, Johnny Yoon, Bruce Lung, Bruce Lai, who was actually Ray Malonzo, Bruce Lai, L-A-I, Bruce Tai, Bruce K.L. Lee, Bruce Lowe, who was actually Yasuaki Kurata, Judy Lee, who was billed as Bruce Lee's sister in Queen Boxer, Kathy Lean, who is Lady Bruce Lee in Kung Fu Exorcist. But there's really four major ones. Bruce Lee, L-E and L-I, Dragon Lee, and Tang Long. Tang Long's the one who's in Game of Death. Dragon Lee was in a bunch of South Korean ones. L.E. Bruce is the good martial artist who's in all the Filipino ones, and L.I. is the good-looking one who's not a good martial artist, but he imitates Bruce really well, and looked exactly like Bruce Lee from the right. So one of the first movies to figure out how to bring Bruce Lee back to life was The Green Hornet, which used actual Bruce Lee footage from his 1960s television show. So what happened was, there was a guy named Larry Joachim who was a film distributor, and his son, Marco Joachim, who was 10 years old at the time, really wanted to find a way for his dad to have a hit. And he said, "Dad, you should make a Bruce Lee movie," because Enter the Dragon was huge. There was this TV series, The Green Hornet. I bet you could get the theatrical rights to the TV show. His son really pushed him, and he flew out to LA, and Fox thought the series was a bomb. Bruce Lee was Kato, the Green Hornet's sidekick on it, but it lasted one season before it was canceled because it wasn't a great show. And so Fox said, "Sure, you can have there's no money here." So then Marco, this 10-year-old kid, went into their basement where they had a flatbed editing machine and edited it together into a feature film that gets released. And they went to check on its grosses when it opened that weekend at the Times Square Theater, and there was this massive line around the block. And it became this big, big hit because people were so hungry for Bruce Lee. And so what was happening at that point is other distributors saw this. They weren't dummies. There were some people like Terry Levine at Aquarius Releasing who took footage of Bruce Lee from before he started doing kung fu movies, and then he wound up making a movie called Fist of Fear, Touch of Death. But if we're gonna walk down this all-you-can-eat crap buffet of Bruce Lee exploitation movies, my favorite place to go first, I think of it as the dessert bar, which is Bruce Lee biopics. They're so far removed from reality and so weird. Strangely enough, a lot of people sport Hitler mustaches in them, like in Big Boss 2. It's really tasteless and insensitive, but that's a given when you're in the Bruceploitation genre. Another movie that might be the great Bruceploitation movie of all time is The Dragon Lives Again. It starts with Bruce Lung playing Bruce Lee, dead, and a close-up of his boner underneath a sheet. Weirdly enough, Bruce Lee's boner appears in several Bruceploitation movies based on a scurrilous, baseless accusation that Bruce Lee's penis was so mighty that after death in the morgue it jutted up like some kind of national monument, and a photographer actually snuck into the morgue and took pictures of it. This was not true. It never happened. And yet, here's Bruce Lee on the gurney with the sheet, boner sticking up. The morgue attendant yanks back the sheet, and thank God it's not his boner, it's his nunchucks just jutting out of his pants at a saucy and suggestive angle. Where can a movie go from there? To hell. Bruce Lee is the only man powerful enough to stand up against the King of Hell's enemies, who include Dracula, Clint Eastwood, Zatoichi the Blind Swordsman from the Japanese series, and also James Bond. Assisting Bruce Lee, however, is Popeye the Sailor and Kane from Kung Fu, seen in America played by David Carradine, a role that was stolen from Bruce Lee originally. Nevertheless, Bruce Lee, Popeye, and Kane from Kung Fu defeat Dracula, James Bond, and Clint Eastwood. And at the end of the movie, Bruce Lee is so empowered that he flies into the air like some kind of giant fairy as the entire cast turns around and says, "Goodbye, Bruce Lee, goodbye." Freeze frame, happy ending. It's an amazing, amazing film. And then Game of Death was Golden Harvest's Bruce Lee exploitation movie, because they were Bruce Lee's studio. And they had Bruce Lee footage where this movie, there was gonna be this very philosophical thing that embodied his philosophy about martial arts, about bending and not breaking, about using all styles. And Golden Harvest really, really wanted to make more Bruce Lee money. But they also really, really wanted to be tasteful and respectful of Bruce Lee's widow, Linda. But in '78, which was very late in the Bruceploitation cycle, there were so many of these movies coming out, making decent, if not great money, and so Golden Harvest couldn't hold out anymore. They took this footage, hired Tong Lung, a South Korean actor, to impersonate Bruce Lee by obscuring his face or being covered up by a paper photograph of Bruce Lee or a giant pair of sunglasses. And often they'll be talking to Tong Lung, who we'll see from behind, and then they'll cut to footage of Bruce Lee from Way of the Dragon or Fist of Fury or The Big Boss for a reaction shot. Game of Death is one of the tackiest acts of cinematic necrophilia you'll ever see. It's anchored in the middle by a reenactment of Bruce Lee's funeral, spliced in with actual footage of Bruce Lee's funeral. And you would think after that sort of crass display of gross commercialism, Golden Harvest would say enough, but they made a sequel a few years later. So the Bruce Lee exploitation movies made a lot of money for some people for a short period of time, and then made very, very little money for a lot of people for a long period of time. Bruceploitation fed on itself. The more of these movies that got made, the more demand it created. The more Bruce Lee, L-I, Bruce Lee, L-E, Dragon Lee, Bruce Lung, Bruce Jung, Bruce Lei, L-E-A, movies that came out, the more confusion there was in people's minds, and the more idea that maybe one of these was a real Bruce Lee movie. I mean, after all, The Green Hornet had been released as a movie, and that featured footage of an actual Bruce Lee doing Kung Fu. And then the other thing was that people's advertising campaigns were using pictures of Bruce Lee in their ads, even if he wasn't in their movie. This kind of crass exploitation of Bruce Lee's name did not go unchallenged by the United States legal system. There was a movie called Goodbye Bruce Lee, His Last Game of Death. And the Pennsylvania Consumer Protection Bureau got involved when so many Bruce Lee fans had gone hoping to see a new Bruce Lee film and were so angry that they stepped in, and actually a judge in Pennsylvania handed down an injunction that forced Goodbye Bruce Lee, His Last Game of Death to post a notice at the box office that this movie did not actually contain footage of Bruce Lee or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as the advertising all promised. The world couldn't let go of Bruce Lee, and they couldn't accept the fact he was dead. Bruce Lee's own brother, Robert Lee, released an album of Bruce Lee folk songs. And on the one hand, it's gross and crass and exploitative and sort of something only sick, cannibalistic producers would ever do to an actual dead human being. On the other hand, there's something optimistic and hopeful and kind of touching about it, that fans wanted to believe that there was still Bruce Lee out there. There was still Bruce Lee they hadn't seen, that there was more to him, that he would still speak to them in a certain way. And so it's really sort of half horrifying and half heartbreaking that Bruce Lee spawned the Bruceploitation genre.
Bruce Lee is gone, but his supreme style of fighting goes on and on in Goodbye, Bruce Lee, his last game of death. Bruce Lee, he's more than a memory to his millions of brothers of all colors. And now he's back